The door slammed open so hard the silverware rattled. A small black boy stumbled inside, clutching his ribs, tears streaking the dust on his face. Dozens of rich white diners froze mid-bite as he gasped for air, then screamed with everything he left. "Please, someone help! They're hitting my mom." Silence. No waiter moved. No customer stood. Every eye drifted, slow, terrified, to the corner table where Brandon Cole, the most feared white mob boss in the city, sat eating his dinner like nothing mattered. The boy's knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of a chair, sobbing harder now. "Sir, please, they're going to kill her. She doesn't pay." Two of Brandon's enforcers stood instantly, hands on their weapons. But Brandon didn't move. He just raised one finger, freezing everyone in place. The boy stared at him, not with fear, but with desperate hope, the kind you only see when a child has run out of every other option. Brandon finally rose from his chair. Slow, calm, deadly. He walked toward the trembling kid, knelt to eye level, and in a voice colder than the marble floor said, "Tell me who touched your mother." The boy swallowed hard. His torn shirt clung to a fresh bruise. His tiny hands shook as he whispered, "White men, 3 of them, they said people like us don't deserve to live here." A storm rolled across Brandon's face, because nobody talked like that in the city, not unless they wanted to disappear. He placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Son, you came to the right man. If this already made your blood boil, tap like, and subscribe so you don't miss stories where justice finally wins." Brandon stood up, his jaw tight, his voice lethal. "Show me where they are." The entire restaurant watched in stunned silence as the boy led a monster straight toward the men hurting his mother. Brandon's men rushed to open the door, but he stopped them again with just a look, because the boy had said something, one tiny detail, that made Brandon's entire expression shift from cold anger to something far more dangerous. "Repeat that," Brandon said quietly. The boy wiped his nose, voice trembling. "They told my mom that people like us should stay out of their neighborhood." Brandon's jaw locked, his eyes sharpened, and for the first time the entire restaurant understood. This wasn't just a frightened child's plea. This was personal. If this happened in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you stand for fairness, hit subscribe. The black sedan roared down the street as Brandon sat beside Deshaun, listening silently. The boy could barely keep still. His leg bounced. His fingers twisted the hem of his shirt. Every few seconds he wiped tears with the back of his hand, trying to be strong. "She tried to close the shop early today," he whispered. "Mama saw those men outside, and she told me to stay behind her no matter what." The car turned into a narrow block, old brick apartments on one side, small black-owned shops on the other. Brandon recognized the area. A neighborhood decent people built with their own hands. A neighborhood certain white gangs have been trying to choke out for years. What happened next? Brandon asked. They walked in. One kicked a machine, another pushed over a basket. Deshaun swallowed hard. And their leader, the tall one with the shaved head, he laughed and said Mama should smile for her kings. Brandon's fingers curled, knuckles whitening. She told them no. The boy continued. She said we pay our bills and we work hard. We don't owe anybody. Brandon stared straight ahead, stone-faced but seething, and that's when he grabbed her. Deshaun whispered. He slammed her into the dryer. She hit her head, and they told her next time they'd take me instead. Brandon didn't speak, didn't blink. He just leaned forward and tapped the driver's seat twice. Faster. The sedan shot forward. Because now Brandon didn't just want to find the men who hurt that woman. He wanted to crush every single thing they stood for. The car screeched to a stop outside the laundromat. Even from the street, Brandon could see the damage. Shattered glass glittering across the sidewalk, a bent, open sign hanging sideways, and a faint smear of blood on the doorframe. Deshaun jumped out before the engine even cooled. "Mama, Mama." His small sneakers slapped the floor as he ran inside. Brandon followed, slow and controlled, every step heavier than the last. The laundromat looked like a war zone. Machines overturned, laundry scattered, a rack of clothes knocked completely over. It was the kind of destruction that wasn't just meant to hurt. It was meant to humiliate. He found Keisha sitting in the corner, hand pressed to a cut on her forehead, her breathing shaky. Even injured, she tried to smile when her son hugged her. "I'm okay, baby. I'm okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. Brandon knelt beside her, his shadow covering half the room. "What exactly did they do?" he asked. Keisha looked up, surprised to see a white man kneeling at her level, speaking gently. She didn't know who he was, but she could feel the anger radiating off him, an anger aimed at the men who hurt her. "They demanded money," she said softly. "I told them we barely make enough to keep the lights on." She touched the back of her head, wincing. "That's when their leader grabbed me and said black women should know their place." Brandon's nostrils flared, the only sign he was furious. Deshawn clutched his mother's arm. "Mama tried to call the police," he said, but the tall man took her phone and said nobody cares about people like us. Keisha exhaled shakily. "They laughed while they broke everything. And before leaving, one of them told my son to watch closely, so he'd learn what happens to families that don't obey." Brandon stood slowly. He looked around the destroyed room, and something changed in his face. It wasn't anger now. It was purpose. He turned to his men. "Find them." No yelling, no theatrics, just an order sharp enough to cut through steel. Deshawn tugged Brandon's sleeve. "Sir, why are you helping us?" Brandon looked down at him. His eyes were colder than before. "Because cowards who hide behind racism don't get to breathe in my city." Keisha stared at him, confused, grateful, overwhelmed. Who are you?" she whispered. Brandon didn't answer. He just reached into his coat, pulled out a folded handkerchief, and gently placed it against her bleeding forehead. "Someone who won't let this happen again." And with that, the hunt began. As Brandon stood in the wrecked laundromat, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, watched a 6-second clip, and a slow, chilling smile crept across his face. "Idiots," he murmured. "They just ended their own lives." If you believe talent can silence every insult, share this video. And to everyone watching from the US, UK, and Canada, your voice matters. Tony and 2 other enforcers rushed in, both breathing hard. "Boss, you need to see this," Tony said. Brandon handed him the phone back. "I already did." The clip showed Chad, the shaved head leader, drunkenly live-streaming the attack. He bragged about educating a black woman. He laughed about breaking her place. He even filmed his own face while stomping one of the machines. It wasn't just evidence. It was a confession wrapped in arrogance. Keisha covered her mouth, horrified. Deshawn's small hands balled into fists. Brandon's voice dropped into something calm and lethal. "Download every video, every comment, every tag. These men just gifted me the rope I'll hang them with." Tony nodded and began sending files to a private server. Within seconds, Brandon's entire network had the clips. Brandon walked toward the shattered front window, hands clasped behind him, studying the street like a general planning a war. "Chad Malone," he said quietly, repeating the name as if tasting poison. 27. No real family. No discipline. He hurts black families because he thinks no one will fight back. He turned to Deshawn. "But he didn't expect you." The boy blinked. "Me?" "You ran across the whole neighborhood, bleeding, terrified, and still begged for your mother. That takes more courage than grown men have." Keisha's eyes welled up, but Brandon didn't soften. He turned to his men. "Call Detective Rivera. She still owes me a favor. Tell her this is coming across her desk in an hour." Tony hesitated. "The police? You sure?" Brandon smirked. "When idiots put their crimes on camera, even corrupt cops can't bury it." He stepped closer to Keisha. "Those men won't touch you again. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Keisha held his stare, still unsure whether this dangerous white man was her enemy or the only person willing to stand for her. Brandon placed a gentle hand on Deshawn's shoulder. "You did the right thing coming to me. Now let me finish what they started." He turned toward the door. "Let's pay Chad a visit." And just like that, the hunted became the hunters. Detective Rivera arrived at the precinct with coffee in one hand and a stack of unfinished reports in the other. She wasn't expecting chaos today, but chaos was already waiting for her. 3 junior officers were huddled around a computer screen, whispering. When they saw her enter, they scattered like children caught stealing cookies. Rivera frowned. What now? Tony was standing by the hallway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Detective, he said, you might want to sit. She didn't. She walked straight past him. Show me. When the video loaded, her jaw clenched. There was Chad, loud, drunk, proud, filming himself smashing Keisha's machines, mocking her tears, and spitting out racist garbage like it was entertainment. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she closed the laptop. Who's behind this? She asked. Tony didn't blink. Brandon Cole. Rivera exhaled sharply. Brandon was dangerous, but unlike most men in power, he followed a code. What does he want? Tony shrugged. Justice. For them. Meanwhile, Brandon wasn't waiting. He was already in the middle of downtown, walking with the confidence of a man who'd owned the streets for 20 years. You called for me? A voice said behind him. Detective Rivera stood there now, holding the laptop under her arm. Brandon didn't waste time. Chad and his pack are parasites, he said. They record their crimes. They laugh about them. And they targeted a black woman who works herself to bone. Rivera nodded slowly. I'll take the case. But we both know they have protection. Brandon's lips curled. Not anymore. Tony handed Rivera a folder, thick and heavy. Digital prints, screenshots, timestamps, IP logs, everything a prosecutor dreams of. You built a federal case, she murmured. No, Brandon corrected. They built it. I'm just delivering. Back at the laundromat, Keisha stood by the repaired doorway, staring out at the street. She wasn't used to silence. Not after yesterday. Deshawn tugged her sleeve. Mama, you think he'll really stop them? Keisha hesitated. She didn't trust dangerous men. But Brandon wasn't hiding what he wanted. He wanted the racist who hurt them gone. Yes, baby, she whispered. I think he will. Rivera returned to the station and called every officer she trusted. We're hitting the gang tonight, she announced. No delays. No looking the other way. I have evidence that can't be buried. One officer raised a hand. But Detective, the captain, Rivera cut him off. The captain doesn't outrank the truth. Outside, news vans began circling the block. Someone had leaked the video, and the city was already choosing sides. Brandon stood outside the laundromat as the sun went down. Sirens wailed in the distance. Police lights flashed across the windows. He didn't move. He just said quietly, "It begins." And for the first time in their miserable lives, the men who terrorized black families were about to run out of places to hide. Night fell fast, swallowing the neighborhood in deep blue shadows. But the darkness didn't slow the police convoy creeping toward an old garage on the edge of town. Inside, Chad and his boys were drinking, laughing, bragging about teaching lessons to people who don't belong here. They had no idea the world outside had already changed. No idea half the city had watched their racist tirade online. No idea news reporters were broadcasting their names. No idea a powerful white man had just turned their own stupidity into a noose. Detective Rivera stood behind a parked cruiser, bulletproof vest strapped tight. On my mark, she ordered. The battering ram swung. Boom! The door shattered. Police, hands where we can see them. Chad spun around, spilling beer, eyes wide. What the? We didn't do nothing. Rivera stepped forward, holding up a tablet. Oh, really? Then tell me why you recorded yourself committing every single crime. The video began playing. His own voice echoed through the room. Black women should know their place. Every officer stiffened. Chad stopped breathing. No. This is taken out of context. Rivera cut him off. You beat a mother. You terrorized a child. You posted it like entertainment. She snapped the cuffs around his wrists. You're going away for a long time. 2 more officers dragged out his men, each one pale, shaking. suddenly realizing they weren't untouchable. Outside, reporters swarmed the street. Flashing lights lit up Chad's terrified face as he was shoved into the squad car. "Detective, is this tied to the racial attacks in the Oak District? Did the victim survive? Who exposed the gang?" Rivera only said, "Justice exposed them." Across town, Brandon stood beside Keisha in the quiet laundromat. The hum of newly repaired machines filled the air. Deshaun watched the news on a small TV mounted in the corner. "Mom, they got him." His voice cracked with relief. He turned to Brandon. "Sir, thank you." Brandon didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "You thanked yourself, kid. You ran for help. You didn't freeze." Keisha stepped closer, voice trembling. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't," Brandon said simply. "You protect your son. You rebuild. That's enough." A knock sounded at the door. Detective Rivera entered, exhausted but proud. "It's done," she said. "All charges filed. Every one of them." She nodded at Brandon. "Your cooperation was useful." Brandon smirked. "Glad I could assist the law." Rivera turned to Keisha. "You're safe now. They won't come back." For the first time in 2 days, Keisha breathed without fear. Brandon glanced at Deshaun. "Come by tomorrow. I have something for you." "What is it?" the boy asked. Brandon placed a hand on his shoulder. "A future where nobody touches your family again." Sunlight poured through the laundromat windows the next morning, soft and warm. The first peaceful morning the place had seen in days. New machines hummed gently. Fresh paint covered the once cracked walls. The smell of detergent, not fear, filled the air. Keisha folded clothes behind the counter, still moving carefully from her injuries, but lighter, calmer. Every few minutes, she looked at the door, like her body still hadn't accepted that danger was finally gone. Deshaun rushed in from outside, holding something close to his chest. "Mama, he's here." Brandon stepped in behind him, wearing a clean gray coat, a quiet presence that filled the room without effort. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who had seen too much darkness and decided this one family didn't deserve any more of it. Deshaun opened his hands. Inside was a small drawing, a stick figure boy holding hands with his mother, and next to them, a tall figure in a long coat. Keisha's eyes softened. "Baby, you drew Mr. Cole?" Deshaun nodded. "He protected us, like a big tree." Brandon looked down at the paper, and for a single heartbeat, something cracked through his hard exterior. Not weakness, memory. A reminder of the family he once lost, and the one standing in front of him now. Healing. He folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside his coat. "I'll keep this," he said quietly. "Right here." Keisha took a step closer. "I don't know what we did to deserve your help," she said softly. Brandon met her eyes. "You survived," he replied, "and you fought back. That's enough for me." Outside, a reporter's voice echoed from a passing radio. "Local racist gang dismantled overnight. The city credits community bravery." Keisha smiled. For once, the world wasn't talking about tragedy. It was talking about justice. As Brandon turned to leave, Deshaun grabbed his hand. "Sir, will we ever see you again?" Brandon squeezed gently. "You will. And when you do, it means you're safe." He stepped out into the sunlight, a dangerous man walking away quietly because the danger was finally over. If you believe this should never happen again, share this video. And to my US, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice matters. The laundromat door closed softly behind him, but the peace he left behind stayed.